Brian from Clear Value Tax Channel released a video series called The Great Meltup, and I'm going to share my brutally honest thoughts on what Brian said. And the reason I'm going to share my thoughts is because this message needs to be heard by the masses. But before we get into the video, here's what some of his viewers had said in the comments. Politicians should be jailed for impoverishing the American people. Another one, he's dancing around what he really wants to say, so I'll say it. No matter what, we are fucked. Another one, I'm sick and tired of spending for other countries. We have real, life-threatening problems here. Help our own people first. We're failing miserably due to greed. Continues on, good word. We don't need someone spewing false hope. We need to hear the cold, harsh reality. And finally, well, this is alarming. Usually Brian is the voice of calm reasoning. If he's saying this is seriously bad, then it's really bad. Damn.
I want to tell you about the upcoming melt-up. So this is a story about inflation, how it reaccelerates hard. So you know how we had the Great Recession? Well, I'll coin this event the Great Melt-up. And it will happen. It is inevitable. So this story, it starts with the U.S. government's, so the U.S. federal government's national debt crisis. It's going to get worse. It's going to get exponentially worse. I wish I could describe it in a different way, but I've chosen my words wisely. Exponentially worse, and you could be the judge. Here's the U.S. national debt over the past 100 years. This is coming directly from the government's website at the Treasury. So this is their most recent charts. However, we've already crossed 35 trillion in debt in 2024. As I said, look for yourself. It's become exponentially worse. This is where we're currently at. Again, this is from the U.S. Treasury's website. The federal government is in 35 trillion in debt. The interest payments on this debt is, of course, a big concern. As the government accumulates more debt, the interest payments grows. So the government has to make interest payments to whoever they borrowed money from, whoever they owe money to. So that could be other countries. We're talking about Japan, China, the UK, etc. It could be the Federal Reserve, big financial institutions, big corporations, rich families, rich individuals, whoever has a US government.
Okay, so the first thing I want to say is there's a somewhat misleading chart here, but I don't think it's his fault. But if we go back to this chart on the U.S. national debt over the last 100 years, it's actually worse than this. And that's what I'm sitting there saying is misleading. Look right here, inflation adjusted 2023 dollars. So even though it says 5 trillion here back in 1943, it wasn't 5 trillion. It actually only got to 3 trillion right around here in nominal dollars. So this chart should actually be more like that. Okay, so the quick clarification is to actually accentuate Brian's point even more is this is inflation adjusted dollars to today's dollars. Second, this is absolutely true. I'm not saying, I don't watch the channel. I don't watch any YouTube channels. And a lot of people have said, including the comments, he's a very calm, reasoning person. But this is not incorrect. At the end of the day, we have people in office who want to stay in office. And how do you stay in office? You give people what they want. And what do people want? They want things for free. You know, it's interesting to me, looking at the comments that were being made about him, about this video, there were some things I definitely agreed with, but not for the same reasons. You know, somebody sat there and said, hey, we have so many problems here. Why are we in other countries? I agree with you. Why are we in other countries? We have no reason to be there. And you sit here and look at $1 trillion we spend every single year on the military. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. When you're running $2 trillion deficit every year, how much money we spend on our military, not even just to be in the US to protect us in other countries, is insane. Now, this chart right here, this is the scary one to me. This is what I want people to understand. These net interest costs. Now, a lot of people out there would say, well, that's the reason we need to keep interest rates low is to keep our net interest costs down. Yeah, but you keep interest rates low, you're going to make costs go higher. You're going to have inflation go higher. So the consumer, the people in the world need to understand, we talk about these things saying, hey, you want $100 per hour minimum wage? Great. You're going to have $100 per hour become the new poverty level. That's just the way it works. When you look at interest costs like this, how do you pay these interest costs? Look at these costs right here. This is estimated for 2034, $1.6 trillion. We're right here. And by the way, we've already passed $1 trillion in annual cost servicing our interest debt. That's a huge number. And by the way, boop, why? Increase debt here, increase interest rates here. Guys, it's just math. There's no opinion about this. At the end of the day, there's X amount of dollars spent every year servicing the debt that we took on. And you've got to remember what I've said in past videos. Every time anybody takes on debt, if it's like this, you're taking away from the future. Now, it could still be a good investment for the present and for the future, but these costs going up, this is money you can't put in to the government, into the economy later on. That's just a fact. It's not a speculation. That's money. That doesn't mean that we should have done this here. I'm not getting in that discussion at all. But overall, guys, every single person in this country, left, right wing, whatever, they think the government's too big. Even the left wing, whose goal is to make the government bigger, thinks the government's too big and inefficient. Let's continue on.
It's really not enough to move the needle. So for fiscal year 2024, the US government has collected about $4.4 trillion. So that's essentially the government's income. So they're going to end the fiscal year around $5 trillion. But this is where we're at right now for the year, the fiscal year. Now, here's how much the government has spent so far this fiscal year. $6.3 trillion. So the government has overspent by $1.9 trillion, and they need to borrow the difference. Now, here's what the money is being spent on. So
guys, before we go further, we still have another 1.5 minutes in this clip. But I don't know how anybody gets around this without understanding that there is a serious problem. Now, remember, we haven't experienced a serious problem. We're still the reserve currency of the world. We're still the number one debt in the world. But remember, every bubble starts on a reasonable and good premise. Investing in stocks is a good thing. Investing in innovation is a good thing. Then you have bubbles. Buying real estate is a good thing. Then you have bubbles. Getting a college education is a good thing. Borrowing money to go to college is a good thing. Now you have bubbles. Every bubble is created on a good premise. When is this going to be bad? I don't know. But at some point, you cannot keep spending above what you bring in the long run. Think about you as a person at home. These are your expenses. If you have to borrow money and put your mortgage payment on a credit card, how long is that going to last you? You might have gotten away with it till now saying, I'm fine, nothing's happened so far. But at the end of the day, you have to sit there and say, I'm borrowing against my credit card to pay my mortgage payment. At some point, something's got to happen. The question is, when's that going to be for the US? Let's continue on.
So this is coming from the same website, the US Treasury. The top expense items are Social Security payments, then Medicare, then interest payments, then healthcare, national defense, income security, veterans benefits, education.
And remember, this is year to date. This ain't done yet. This ain't done yet. This ain't done yet. This ain't done yet. All of these are not done for the year yet. This is not annual payments. This is what they've done year to date.
Education, etc. Now, I want you to take a real good look at this. The government is overspending by about $2 trillion currently, right? So where are we going to cut $2 trillion from? Take a good look. Who's going to get screwed over here? Now, this is also coming from the Treasury's website. So this is another problem. It says that as of August 2024, the government will spend over $1 trillion a year on interest payments over the next 12 months. So that's the current run rates. So the interest payments are accelerating. That means that there's going to be less money for other programs. So listen, this is one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve had to cut interest rates. Just think about it. For the full year, if the government's going to collect $5 trillion in income from taxes, right? So $5 trillion, and they're going to spend $1 trillion on interest payments. That's 20% of tax collections. So what's going to happen when that gets increased to 30%, 50%, 100%? It's just going to be, and this is unsustainable. It's just getting worse. This is ridiculous. It's like a house of cards. So it's eventually going to collapse. However, by lowering interest rates, it just buys more time. It's a stalling technique. Now, some people are going to say that the US government, the Federal Reserve, they can just print the money, right? And I'll say that you are absolutely correct. Yes, they can. However, if they do that, if they print trillions of more dollars, you know what's going to happen. You know the consequences. That's going to skyrocket.
So, one, correct. With more money out there, easier access to money, it devalues the dollar. The devaluation of the dollar is inflation. Now, I will say, There's a lot of people out there who believe in something called modern monetary theory, which basically means it doesn't matter how much you print, everything will be fine. And the best argument I've heard against that is, great, then why charge taxes? If you can just print every dollar in the world and cover everything and there's no repercussions, why not just charge no taxes? And for the people who think that there's no repercussions, what happened with inflation? You know, the mistake I made back in 08 and 09 when they printed all that money to QE, quantitative easing, was saying we're going to have inflation. But I realized something wrong. The money didn't go into the people's pocket. When you put money into people's pocket, what happens? Costs go up. You know, after 2020, after COVID, when the government was writing checks to people to stay home, we had to, as a business owner, we had to pay a lot more money to get people to come out to work for us. Why? Well, I'm getting $600 a week from the government. Why should I go to work? And I thought it was funny because if I asked every single one of those people, are you a hard worker? Do you value your job? Do you value working hard? Yes. Well, then why are you sitting at home making $0? At the end of the day, they're all humans making personal decisions that are selfish decisions. Just like everybody in Congress has selfish decisions. What are those decisions? Well, spending. You don't want to be the person in Congress who says, I'm not going to spend for this company or that company or this, school. I know right-wingers talk about, hey, I want a new school because that makes our community better. Does it? They want a new school? Okay, fine. But remember, that's got to be paid somehow. Let me ask a question, everybody. When have you ever heard of the government making themselves smaller? I'll wait. Argentina. They're the only ones right now that are making themselves smaller because they've got a libertarian president who came in and said, this is all BS. And all indications are things are better now, are getting better. This is a real issue. And at some point, it's going to be a problem. When? I have no idea. Brian has no idea. No one has an idea. But he is right. Right now, we're at 17 or 20% of our revenues being used for interest payments. Some point it'll become 30%. Then 40%, then 50%. At what point is it a crisis?
But listen, I really want you to think about that because the US cannot afford that. They cannot afford to have a deep recession or high unemployment. You know why? If there's a deep recession or high unemployment, then tax collections go down. And then that's going to leave us in the same position, a big deficit, and then the government would have to borrow more money. The debt will keep going up, and the interest payments keep going up. So listen, in a deflationary environment, your pre-existing debts become more expensive to service. So it's just going to make the situation worse. So listen, I'm basically saying that the US government really put everyone in a bad spot, a very difficult spot. That's the truth. They left us with no good options. So if you're thinking, what do you mean? How can you be in a position where there are no good options? Isn't that being pessimistic or negative? So I'll explain it to you like this. Just think about it like this. This is like the most straightforward way I could put it. Let's just say that you decide to make a very bad decision. Let's say that you decide to rob a bank. And in the process, all the police come and surround the bank. In that position, what are your options? Do you have any good options? No, they're all going to be bad options. So those are the consequences to making a bad decision.
So it's interesting. I actually disagree with them on this. I think we need the deep recession. I think we need to be back against the wall to make the necessary cuts that we have to make the necessary decisions that we have to make. Guys, look at the Great Depression. That was awful. But we came out of the Great Depression better, stronger, and on an economic boom that lasted 50 years. Some would argue 80 years. I look at that saying, that was awful. And I'm not sitting there saying I want that. But sometimes the best thing can happen is to be forced to make the tough decision. It's not a bad decision necessarily. It's a tough decision. We can afford a recession. Name me one recession that we've had that we didn't come out stronger at some point a few years afterwards. Probably, I would argue, right afterwards. Remember, I've said on this channel many times, recessions are great because it weeds out crap. You weed out crappy businesses, crappy employees, uneducated. You weed out all that and tell people you got to reset. I disagree that is not a good option. To me, that's the option I want. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, Paul, you're such a dick. You want people to lose jobs? It's not a want thing. I'm looking at the greater good of everything, saying that would be better for us in the long run. I own many businesses. The best businesses are the ones that had the worst problems up front. The story I always give is about managing my real estate. I started out buying real estate in '04 and I killed it. And then all of a sudden I hit a wall and then occupancy started to fall. And I was stressed. I was anxious. And guess what? From there, someone gave me the idea, Paul, why don't you try renovating a unit? And why don't you try making the unit better to get higher rents and better quality tenants? And I said, well, what do I have to lose? It's going to be 10 grand to try to renovate this unit. Let's see how it goes. And it was a home run. And that temporary bad time is going to make me probably hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, in my lifetime from that one decision to spend $10,000. But can I tell you how terrified I was back then? Every single business we've had has gone through some lull. You learn from the bad times. I think that's what we kind of need. And I'm not trying to wish bad things about people, because I know if you're watching this channel, you're probably one of the better ones. If you're watching this video, you're one of the ones that's probably a little bit more responsible than everybody else. This is why we talk about these things, saying, hey, if you're out here learning, you're probably in a higher threshold than most people. And I think that's wonderful. And I do think that people misunderstand what the history of deficits and surpluses were for. There are a lot of people out there who say, hey, deficits are good. And John Maynard Keynes said that. Well, no, what he said was during good times, you have surpluses and you keep those surpluses for when the bad times happen so you can help society. But now in the last 44 years, we've had 2 years of surpluses. And the surpluses were only because the economy grew much faster than expected. So we had surpluses in the 90s. Now, for those of you who care about taxes, if you think for 1 second that this is not going to lead to higher taxes, you're delusional. And for those people who like spending, if you think for 1 second that eventually we're not going to get to the point we have to cut spending, you're delusional. Those are the hard decisions that I think Brian it needs to also discuss. And by the way, this is a great video in the sense of, I don't think he's being a fudster here. First, when I was told about this video, I was like, oh, great, it's going to be some negative video. I actually don't think he's being negative. I think he's actually being very realistic, saying, guys, I wish he would say, it's just math, because that's all it is. Let's go to an extreme. Let's say our debt goes from 35 trillion to 100 trillion tomorrow. How are we going to cover that? 2 ways. More debt or increased taxes, or a combination of both. Those are the issues we have. And for those of you who think increased taxes are going to happen, I do think increased taxes are going to happen. But you have a lot of wealthy members of Congress who like their pocketbook a lot. And they also have lobbyists who are supporting very wealthy people. People don't like higher taxes. And if you're in the middle class and you think it's only a rich person problem, you are absolutely delusional for 2 reasons. One, eventually they're going to have to tax you. You can only tax so much from the top. Look at the Netherlands. I just saw this from the Netherlands. The Netherlands created a wealth tax that they thought was going to bring in $147 million in revenue. Instead, it caused that the richest people in the country left, and it caused a $500 million decrease in taxes. Eventually, and I put on Twitter, Atlas Shrugged. It's a reference to the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, where she talks about how eventually wealthy people who are creators are going to say, I'm out. If I have no incentive to do more, I'm out. That's how the middle class is going to get taxed. They're going to get taxed with actual taxes, and also when the people who own companies have no incentive to do more. And they're going to say, you know what, we're done. We're not going to grow anymore. We're not going to start more businesses. We're not going to do these things. As much as we hate to say it, because we villainize wealthy people, we've got to remember that not many people in this country work for a poor person. Most people in this country work for upper middle class or higher people. Those are the business owners, and you got to incentivize people. Show me someone's incentive, I'll show you their behavior. When we have all these deficits happening, there's got to be a way to get it. Now, the funny thing is about all this is, and I'm going to make a video soon about this, I have created a plan that I call the One Tax Plan that actually solves all these problems, decreases government spending, has a flat tax, and increases revenue and pays down debt. And I'll go over that. And you know what I'd love to do? I'd love to actually talk with Brian about this and maybe do a collaboration about it, because I think it'd be a great idea, because it seems like he understands the real issues here. He's not being a fudster here by saying, guys, we're all effed. He's just sitting there saying, look, something's got to give. What's going to give?
So the best bad option that we have right now is to inflate. And that's going to be the favored route, because 2 reasons.
I've been saying this for years. I always tell people, when you buy a home, your debt is fixed. If all of a sudden inflation doubled your income and doubled your house value, guess where your mortgage is? Same price. Guess what your mortgage payment is? Exact same. So as inflation occurs, your debt payments stay on past dollars. How is it any different for the US? It's no different for the US. I've always said I think the government secretly wants good inflation. Now, I'm not a tinfoil hat kind of guy. But when I hear people say the government doesn't report the true inflation number, I've always said I don't believe the true inflation number. To me, true inflation is nominal GDP growth. That's the true inflation number. We can manipulate what's in the basket of goods with CPI, blah, blah, blah. But to me, the true inflation number is how much more money is the US making? When I say that, the nominal per capita GDP. Because at the end of the day, people are going to live off their income. And if incomes double tomorrow, that's the true inflation number. If incomes fell in half tomorrow, that's the true deflation number. Now, I have no evidence to support this. I'm just using logic. So he's sitting here talking about this, and I think he's going to get into that right now.
So the first reason is because inflation makes it easier to keep up with interest payments. And two, inflation gives the elite class an advantage. The advantage is first access to money. Okay, so what's the lesson here? The lesson is that you must invest in financial assets. This is not to get rich. This is for your protection. This is just to keep up with inflation. So I'm telling you, inflation
is the friend to investors, and a lot of people hate talking about that. Is it a hidden tax? Yes. Warren Buffett wrote a great op-ed in the late 70s about inflation being a tax, and I get that. But at the end of the day, you've seen me talk about the stock market to GDP ratio. And I've said US stocks will be some sort of percentage of GDP. So if the US government can inflate that GDP, what's going to happen to stocks? Inflation is a friend of real estate. Because if you buy a house today that's brand new for $300,000 and tomorrow it costs $600,000 to build that exact same house because of inflation, what is your house worth now? It ain't worth $300,000, I'll tell you that right now. But you're still paying on that $300,000 mortgage and that $300,000 mortgage payment. Now he's sitting there saying, invest to protect yourself. Absolutely. Ride that wave. I think he's right. To a certain element, it's just to keep up. That's the funny part. It is to a certain element just to keep up. When should you start? Why are you waiting? Dollar cost average. Start now. Your goal is to sit here and invest today for the future. Dollar cost averaging into low cost ETFs that match the market. Great way to do it. Buy yourself a home that you can afford. Buy rental properties that you can sit there and get enough rent to cover the mortgage payment, all expenses, and put a little bit of money in your pocket. I want to shift your focus from being on the defensive and protecting yourself to going on the offense and using the government mishaps to your advantage. These government things they're doing are going to happen. But I want you to remember, no one is coming to save you. No one's coming to save any of us. It doesn't matter who's in office. They're the problem, not the solution. The lifelong people in office scare the crap out of me. They're not going to do what's right for you. They're going to do what's right for them. That's human nature. So how do you get in the offense? It's more important than ever that you got to surround yourself with people who are headed in the direction that you want to go. Inflation could get crazy again. I have no idea where it's going to go. So you have to continue investing. Join a community of like-minded investors. You should not be doing this alone. If the rug does get pulled out, the hype shit will fall the hardest. Understand what you're buying when you buy a stock. Surround yourself with like-minded, smart people who are in the direction you want to go. So if you want to join that same community that we've made to do all of that, click the link in the description below. Thank you for your time.